Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be back with you all after my absence last week. Today is just me, which is a little unfortunate as it means that it's going to be a bit more of a strain on my voice, but I'm sure we'll manage to get away with it. So as sort of previewed, I'm going to be talking today about the early stages of planning ahead for your interview at Oxford or Cambridge. My name is Matt. I look after our research team here at UniAdmissions. And my job is to make sure that all of the things that we're going to be suggesting in today's presentation, in next week's when we discuss admissions tests, and in all the resources that we produce are based on hard facts that I can track them all in lovely Excel spreadsheets. And so that we're giving you strategies and approaches and revision materials that really do help, rather than things that are just a kind of an intuition that we've had. I'll be running through today some of what I think are the key things to bear in mind when you're planning ahead for interview. I'll be talking a little bit about the services UniAdmissions provide, and I will answer a handful of questions, but I'm a little worried about the state my voice will be in by the end of this presentation, so probably it'll be a little bit of a shorter Q&A than usual, but I'll be back to a full house of people next week, and so please do join us again for that. So without further ado, thinking about planning ahead for your interview at Oxford or Cambridge. The first thing, of course, to think about is how you get the interview. We'll then be thinking a little bit about what the interview is like and what the criteria that your performance at the interview are assessed on, so that you can think in a sort of a sensible way about how to plan ahead for that. I've seen a question already come through from Ikra. These are always recorded and available online normally Wednesday of next week. So do visit the UniAdmissions website to find those if you want to see it again. But as I say, these happen every week, so there's plenty of time to come back and speak to us, and we'll be revisiting this topic in, I think, 6 weeks' time at the end of October, as we really close in on interview time. So how do you go about getting an interview? Now, this is where I like to bring in the pie chart that I use for a lot of our presentations. The thing to remember here is that the interview is the final step of the application process, which means that if you get to the interview, it's because you've done everything else right. You're not going to get in without an interview. So really everything that you are doing in the build up to the interview is about getting there. So that means your success in GCSEs and A-levels, your predicted grades or your achieved grades, whatever they may be. I know that many of you will have worries about the teacher assessed grades that students have been getting the last couple of years, but do remember that that has been the case for everyone, and so the universities are being fairly liberal in their interpretation of those. You've got your score in the admissions test, which I think is an area that students have a tendency not to give as much attention as they should. And you've got the personal statement and things like that, where people tend to spend a little bit more time than perhaps they need to. So the first thing to think about is how good your GCSEs need to be. Now, GCSEs aren't as important now as they used to be. They will be assessed in the context of your school. So if you've gone to a school where you are the first person to get straight 9s at GCSE for 7 years, that's going to be much more impressive than if you were one of 10 people who did that in your year group. Oxford put a little bit more emphasis on GCSEs than Cambridge do, and we'll come on to talk about that in a moment. We're talking about medicine in particular. And as a general rule, your GCSEs will matter more for the more competitive subjects and less for the less competitive subjects. But it's worth remembering that a really strong performance in the admissions test will more than make up for any shortfall in your GCSEs. So don't let your GCSEs being a mix of 7s and 8s put you off applying if that's what you really want to do. I mentioned medicine there. something really important to bear in mind is that for medicine, Oxford will only interview around 40% of their applicants, whereas Cambridge will interview very nearly all of them. So the thing to take into account here is if you're applying for medicine at Cambridge, chances are you're going to get to that interview, and so you're still going to be competing with a great number of other students when you reach the interview stage. Whereas with Oxford, many more students will have been eliminated from the process before the interview, and so you will be competing with fewer students when you get there. So as a general rule, we therefore advise that if you have really great GCSEs, stacks of 9s, if you've been doing really well on the BMAT, on your BMAT practice papers, and you're feeling really confident about your performance there, Oxford may be a better idea for you than Cambridge, because you'll have more of a chance to get out ahead of other applicants. Whereas if you are a little bit weaker on the GCSEs, if you're worried about the BMAT, it's worth considering Cambridge as your first choice, because in that instance, you're going to have the chance to really impress at the interview, even if your GCSEs and BMAT aren't of quite the absolute top level. Moving on to sort of subjects more broadly, whether you get an interview is going to depend an awful lot on the course and the university you're applying to. Oxford will interview almost everyone who applies for chemistry, just as Cambridge do for medicine, but Oxford will interview barely 10% of the people who apply for computer science. The reason for this is that the number of people that are interviewed for each place is relatively fixed at between 2 and 3. And so the more popular a subject is, the less likely you are to get an interview. Chemistry is a little bit of an outlier here because it is inexplicably unpopular. Everyone wants to do biochemistry instead these days. But if you're, again, worried about your profile in terms of the GCSEs or your predicted grades, it's worth thinking about applying for a subject that has a higher interview rate rather than a lower interview rate, so that you're getting as many chances as you can. As I mentioned just a moment ago, Cambridge will interview almost all of their medicine applicants. And the other thing to bear in mind is that Cambridge don't routinely provide data about interviews. Cambridge will interview most people for most subjects, and so the information we have on them is less detailed than the information we have from Oxford, which is a little frustrating, but that's life. What I also want to talk about a little bit is the strength of the correlation between performance on admissions tests and being invited to interview. So I've pulled the example of the MAT, which is the test at Oxford for students applying for maths and joint honours maths courses. And what you can see here is, I don't know if I can get the mouse to go over, shall we? Yes, I think we can. Does this work? Yes, perfect. You can see here down at the lower end, students who are scoring in the bottom 10, 15, 20% of the distribution, virtually none of them are getting an interview. No one is getting an interview who scores less than 21 through 25. And you'll notice that only a very tiny number of people there are perhaps 3, 4. And that persists right up until you get above the up into the 30s, and here still it's still only a very small proportion of students that are getting interviews. It isn't until you get to the point of 56, 57 that you have a position where more than half of students are getting an interview. What we have down here will be at the very lower end will be students who have perhaps got really good GCSEs from a disadvantaged background and have just done really badly in the test, and the university wants to double check. But as you can see, that's really unusual. What you'll see coming up through the middle here is that the share of students who are getting an interview increases up until you reach the mid-70s, at which point everyone who scores at this level is getting an interview, and roughly half of them are getting in. Getting in being the grey section. And as you go right down to the end, you see there are students, the students who score the very best in the test, they all get in. But as you get right down to the end, your chances do go up a lot. So this is just to highlight the strength of that correlation, because what you can see there is that more or less at every grade boundary, doing better on the test is directly correlated with having a better chance of getting an interview. So again, sort of running through the sort of this information, sort of little stylized facts. That graph we were looking at was a sample size of nearly 3,000 applications. The chance of getting in general before you've taken the test is around 12%. But all of a sudden, once you have a score of over 80, your chance of getting in are well over, meaningfully over 50%. So that admissions test score is really transforming your chances of getting in. And as you can see, the gap between the interviewee average score and the offer average score is sort of really clear and really meaningful. So that brings us to the interview itself, because hopefully you've followed my advice and done really well in your preparation and done well on the admissions test. The things to bear in mind are that the interview is much more strictly laid out, much more structured than you might think. Every interview is done by at least two people, so as to make sure that nothing weird happens where one person goes off and sort of freelances. And all of the interviews are being continually audited and checked throughout the day and throughout the weeks of the interview. So if there's any doubt about whether the interview you've had has properly assessed you, that will be picked up almost immediately. You've probably heard sort of horror stories about crazy interview questions, the sort of tell me about a banana sort of thing, how heavy is the earth? Things like this are much less likely to come up these days than they were at one time in the past. And there's a real level of rigor and care that goes into the interviews these days. So really don't worry too much about something wacky happening. That's a little bit of an urban myth as these things go. Now, when you get to the interview, what will it be like? You will have more than one interview, probably 2 interviews at the college you've applied to, or the one you've been assigned to as an open applicant. You're also very likely to be interviewed at another college. You may even get as far as a fourth interview. This is to make sure that if you've applied to one of the more popular colleges, a Brasenose or a Trinity, you'll then be also interviewed at a less popular college, so as to make sure that every student has the same chance of getting in somewhere, even if it's not necessarily their first choice. A lot of students will come out of the interview feeling that they've done really badly, worried that they have no chance anymore. The thing to remember here is that the interview is supposed to be difficult. If the interview was easy, that means that perhaps they've decided not to really stretch you. They don't think you're up to it. The harder the interview feels, the better it probably went. A lot of students come out saying that they thought it was a disaster, and those students get in just as often as students who weren't sure. And students who think it went brilliantly, often those are students who have come across as overconfident, as arrogant, and who the interviewers won't have been all that interested in. And now one of the things I really like to do each year is to talk to the students who've been through the interview, so that we can gather their experiences as a kind of resource to keep on hand for future students. And I sort of like to bring together some tips based on those experiences for how to succeed in the interview. And some of these may seem a little obvious, but I can assure you that they aren't always. The first thing to do is to make sure that you have actually read everything on your personal statement. If you have foolishly included a book that you haven't read yet, make sure you do read it before the interview, because you can be certain that if you haven't read it, it will come up and you'll look silly. Make sure that you're showing the depth of your knowledge, so not just talking about the things you're interested in a kind of superficial way, but making sure that you are really going into the detail of different areas, making sure that you can show that you've read not 1 or 2 books, but 5 or 6 on a particular subject area. The next thing to do is to make sure that you try and stay calm. It's a situation which is really easy to panic in. If you need to stop, have a drink, sort of calm yourself down for a few seconds, you will not be the first person who is needed to do that. and you certainly won't be the last. So it very much won't be held against you if you need to have a little bit of a rest to sort of gather yourself during the interview. And the principal reason for this is, as our next point is, you really want to avoid bullshitting. It's really easy to make the mistake of panicking and saying something that you don't mean, making something up. If you do that, you will look silly. The people who are interviewing you will know. If you don't know, there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying that you don't know. Which really brings us to our last point, which is try not to be overconfident, to show off. You are applying to the university because you want to learn things, not because you want to teach things. And so if you don't know, as I mentioned, that's a good thing. You're supposed to not know. That's why you want to go to university. If you already knew, there wouldn't be any point in going. So make sure that you are presenting yourself as someone who is curious and wants to learn, rather than someone who is knowledgeable and wants to show off. Sorry about that. It's hard work doing it all on my own. So you've taken on board, hopefully, some of these tips, but what are the key criteria that the university are looking for when they're making their assessment? The first thing to think about is the kinds of communication that you're engaging in. The interview is, like all interviews in life, really all about soft skills, making sure that you are communicating in an empathic, adaptable way, that you're working well with new ideas, and that you're thinking about how you are presenting ideas, taking seriously new information, making sure that you're planning in a way that means that your responses are considered and interesting and represent you at your best. If we look, for example, at the interview criteria that Oxford have published for, these are taken from the PPE admissions handbook. The three areas that they emphasize are the kind of enthusiasm for pursuing a problem, the concentration, the passion, essentially, your skill at reasoning, making sure that your arguments fit together, that you are being clear and you are pushing forward with a reasoned line of argument, but that at the same time, if you find yourself going into a dead end, you're able to pull out. If you receive new information that changes your opinion, that you accept that and go with it. And making sure that all of these things, the power of your arguments, the consideration and passion that you have for the subject, that you're able to clearly articulate these so that the interviewer can understand you. It's no good being an absolutely brilliant mind if it's just the mind and it's not something you can get out there, whether that's in writing or in speech. So I hope that has been really helpful. This is just a sort of a short taste of what we're able to provide here at UniAdmissions in terms of the support. For interviews, I just want to focus on a few areas of the support we offer as part of our programs. That first area is the one-to-one tuition we provide. That's completely bespoke work based on your strengths and weaknesses, working with a current student or recent graduate in the subject at the university that you are applying to. And that's followed up by a real bank of mock interviews that you're able to do with different tutors, so that it's an unfamiliar experience, just like the real thing will be, preparing you as you close in on the application, so that when you are going into that real interview, you will have done 5, 6, 7, 8 proper detailed practice interviews, so there won't be anything that's going to throw you off, hopefully, in the real thing. We also provide an absolute wealth of resources, including an interview textbook, which is filled with, I believe, several hundred real interview questions from Oxford and Cambridge. We have hundreds of questions for each of the admissions tests to make sure that you can really excel there and get that opportunity to show yourself in the interview. And using our prep portal, there are huge opportunities to practice those and practice the relevant information in preparation. In terms of building the soft skills, we have our weekly enrichment seminars, which are in this same time slot on a Sunday, so at 2 o'clock. These dive into university level topics, led by students and graduates, and really try to reflect the style of the tutorial system, helping students to find the areas of their subject that they're most passionate about, and to practice the style and level of discussion that is going to be expected of them at interview. These are a kind of a new feature that we introduced last year, and the impact they've had on the level of success for our students has been really meaningful. We also like to run day courses, so these will be intensive presentations of the ideas that you need, whether that's for the interview or for the personal statement or the admissions test, giving you the chance to work with other students and to really put time and effort into your preparation in a kind of intensive way ahead of time. I'm just going to pause briefly here to blow my nose. Thanks for bearing with me. It's hard work when I'm on my own. We're pleased to say that the impact that these resources, these efforts we've made have been really substantial. In the last admission cycle, we were fortunate enough to have over 60% of the students we work with receive offers for Oxford or Cambridge, well ahead of the national average, and well ahead of some of the most impressive schools in the UK. Our facilities aren't quite as handsome or architecturally interesting as those at Eton or St Paul's, but we do a little bit better than them when it comes to Oxford and Cambridge, which is something we're really proud of. But I wouldn't ask that you just take it as read from me. Please do take a look at the reviews we've had on TripAdvisor. TripAdvisor? No, this is Trustpilot. To read about the nice things that we've been able to do, the successes we've been able to have with students. And of course, if you've enjoyed this webinar or any of the others like it, then that's a really good way to let us know, and for me to get a little bit of credit in the bank, which is always nice. The last thing to say is, if you are at all worried about cost, please do get in touch with us regardless. We do provide a range of financial support for our products, whether that is a discount or providing support for free. We worked with nearly 100 students last year. We're targeting to work with 250 this year, and the hope is that next year we'll be able to work with one student on a reduced fee basis for everyone that we work with on a full price basis. So that's a lot of students to bring in. So please, if you are worried at all, please do get in touch and give us the opportunity to work forward from there. I also recommend, if you've enjoyed this presentation, giving a listen to our podcast with my colleagues Will and Rohan. They'll be tackling all kinds of subjects, whether that's interviews, choosing a college, or even what to do in the event of a zombie apocalypse. It's a real range of things there, so I do recommend tuning in for that. And finally, I would urge any of you who are uncertain, and most importantly, those of you who have questions about our programs, about how we can best support you, I recommend getting in touch with us by booking a consultation. Hopefully you can see a little animation running now showing you how it's done, but essentially all you need to do is visit the website, click on the book a consultation button, and we will call you to discuss how we can help. Our consultations are entirely free. It's an opportunity for us to get to know you, to figure out if we can be of help, and to begin to provide that help if that's appropriate. Now, I'm just going to take a small number of questions and round this off at past, and that's principally because of, as you can probably hear, the state of my voice. We'll be back in a larger number next week, so I'm sure we will go for more questions then, but I must apologise for that. So first question for Minkashi. who asks about discussing the program. As I just mentioned, please do book a consultation with us. That is the best way to get in touch. That will mean that one of my colleagues will get in touch with you personally and figure out what we can do to help. Joanna Levison asks about MMIs. At the moment, Oxford and Cambridge aren't using MMIs. They're using the kind of old-fashioned longer interview format. But if you're applying to other universities, Imperial, UCL, King's, many of them are now using MMIs. So it's a really important format to practice with. And particularly for those universities that are having their interviews digitally this year, it's a really important area to practice because you may be doing a slightly weird pre-recorded format. Malak asks about meeting grade requirements. Oxford and Cambridge don't tend to be especially flexible about grade requirements. So it is really important that you get the numbers that you need to there. Jay asked about the weighting of the BMAT. So Cambridge puts less weight on the BMAT when it comes to picking whether they're going to interview you or not, because they interview nearly everyone. But of course, when they're making their decision, it is still an important part of the decision-making process. I don't believe that I have any particular data on that at the moment, so that's something that I would have to revise. Camelia asks about answers to interview questions. We do provide model answers in our books and other resources, but of course there is more than one right answer to an interview question, so we wouldn't recommend learning any particular answer to any particular question by heart. It's all about practicing the skill of answering these type of questions rather than it is about knowing the answers, because often there is no one answer. Saransh asks about international students. So Oxford and Cambridge will often offer the opportunity to be interviewed in person in secondary locations. In years past, they've done interviews in Hong Kong and Singapore for students who are able to travel to the UK. I believe that many of the interviews this year will be digital, so via Zoom or Teams or whatever. So that's obviously avoids the need for travel. But the interview itself, there's no particular registration process. You'll be invited by the university in advance after you put in your application. Camilla asks about sort of customization to the program. This again is a really good opportunity to talk to one of our consultants to figure out what is the best balance of things for you if you want more time on the admissions test or you want more time practicing for interview. Our interview question and answer book covers every subject. I believe we have at least one question for everything. Oh yes, and sort of a second question about the admissions test. It's important to remember that these aren't pass-fail tests. These are just used as one part of the application process. So scoring poorly on one won't necessarily eliminate you, but as we saw in that graph of the MAT, you do need to be scoring fairly well to have a chance, even if occasionally people do from sort of the lower reach of the distribution get a chance. And I'm just going to have one last question because my voice is absolutely going. Anna asks about registering for tomorrow's enrichment program. Once you have signed up with us, that you've put everything in motion, you'll of course get the relevant links and resources, and that includes the enrichment seminars. So if you'd like to come along to the enrichment seminar tomorrow, the best thing to do is to book that consultation today, get in touch with us, and sort of get everything set up from there. Oh, I see. And just very finally, Camelia asks about being invited for interviews. So the thing to know is the interview invites go out normally through around 3 weeks before the interview itself. It's not always the best notice, which is a little frustrating. But I believe that the interviews are expected to be largely digital this year, so you'll be doing it from home anyway. So short notice isn't as much of a worry as it might otherwise have been. So with that, thank you so much for joining me, everyone. It's been a pleasure to speak to you all. Have a lovely weekend. Please rejoin me next week when we'll be talking more about admissions tests and I'm hoping I'll be joined by at least one of my colleagues, which will allow us to have a much longer Q&A, and hopefully I will have a much less sore voice as well. Thanks very much, everyone, and have a lovely weekend. Goodbye.